It began on a windless July evening in 2003, when the air above Ravenwood Lake hung heavy with the scent of pine and distant campfire smoke. The boys had spent their last day of summer camp chasing dragonflies, skipping stones, and carving their names into the dock posts, the kind of simple rituals that, at 12 years old, felt eternal. No one at Ravenwood could have guessed that by morning, their laughter would become an echo. People still tried to explain 2 decades later. Eli Turner was the quiet one, the type to linger behind. Collecting smooth stones, he said, were lucky. Jacob Mills was all energy and bravado, always daring the others to push farther into the woods. Noah Price, the oldest by a few months, was the peacemaker between them. Observant, thoughtful, the kind of boy who noticed when the wind changed direction. That night they promised to stay up past curfew, just once, to watch the lake under moonlight. The counselors' radios crackled around 10:30 as lights went out across the campgrounds. A few stragglers whispered goodnights from the cabins. Somewhere down the hill, an old record player hummed with static. By 11, Ravenwood was asleep, all except for the 3 boys slipping quietly out of cabin 7, flashlights hidden beneath their shirts. They followed the narrow trail to the dock, the one that jutted into the lake like a black mirror under the stars. There was no sound except the rhythmic slap of water against wood. They talked about nothing important, a ghost story they'd overheard, a counselor they thought was weird, the fear of middle school waiting after summer. Their voices carried softly across the stillness. Later, a camper in the next cabin would swear he heard faint laughter around midnight, followed by what he called a low hum, something mechanical, almost electrical, cutting briefly through the quiet. No one believed him at the time. Around 12:15, the night watchman, a retired ranger named Carl Denvers, logged a routine patrol along the mess hall. His flashlight swept over empty picnic tables, the row of canoes pulled ashore. He noted nothing unusual, but years later investigators would re-examine his entry and realize something. He had never checked the lakeside dock. The page simply ended with 3 words: all clear, quiet. The storm came suddenly after midnight. Thunder rolled low and far, the kind that warns before it arrives. Sheets of rain swept across the lake, extinguishing the fire pits and hammering the tin roofs. Counselors rushed from cabin to cabin, counting heads. In cabin 7, 3 beds were found untouched. Eli's backpack was gone, Noah's flashlight missing. Jacob's sneakers, however, sat neatly by the door. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was heavier than the storm. The dock was slick with dew, and the boys' carved initials, E&J, glistened under the early sun. Near the edge, muddy footprints led a few meters down the trail before disappearing into soft soil. Searchers found no sign of a struggle, no torn fabric, no prints leading back. It was as though they'd simply stepped off the earth. The first helicopter arrived by mid-morning, its blades scattering mist over the lake. Parents were notified within hours. Campers huddled together in confusion as uniformed officers cordoned off the shoreline. Rumors began almost immediately. A boat overturned, a kidnapper in the woods, a secret tunnel beneath the camp. The sheriff called for calm, but the sound of police radios carried through the trees long into the afternoon. That evening, as the sun fell behind the pines, searchlights swept across the water in wide arcs. Divers moved methodically through the murky depths but came back empty-handed. Nothing. No bodies, no equipment, not even a floating shoe. The only object recovered was a single plastic whistle caught in a reed bed near the dock. It belonged to one of the counselors lost days earlier. Night came again and the campfire circle stood cold. Parents lingered by the water, their faces pale and motionless. The local news van arrived, setting up bright lights that reflected off the ripples. Someone whispered that the lake was cursed. Someone else said the boys had run away. None of it made sense. By morning, Ravenwood Camp was closed to visitors. The gates locked, the cabins emptied. What began as an innocent night adventure was already turning into a headline. And as the first official search teams prepared to arrive, the forest held its silence, deep, watchful, and unwilling to give up its secret. By morning, the lake was calm again, and the boys were gone. By sunrise, the rumor had already outrun the facts. 3 boys missing from Ravenwood Camp, last seen near the lake, no trace found. The story spread through Maple Hollow, the small Oregon town that had built its summers around that camp. It was supposed to be a safe place for kids, the kind where parents waved goodbye with trust, not fear. But that morning, the trust broke. Sheriff Linda Carver arrived before 8. She'd been with the department 15 years, known for her calm under pressure. But when she stepped out of her cruiser and saw the rows of crying parents, something inside her shifted. "We'll find them," she promised, though even then her voice carried the weight of uncertainty. Volunteers poured in from every corner of the county. By noon, more than 100 people were combing through the forest. Counselors, fishermen, off-duty officers, even teenagers who'd grown up attending Ravenwood. The K-9 units picked up faint traces of scent near the dock, but it vanished halfway down the trail where the mud hardened into gravel. It was as if the ground itself refused to remember where the boys went. Helicopters circled overhead, their shadows gliding over the water. Divers scoured the lake for hours, surfacing to shake their heads in quiet frustration. The camp's mess hall became a command post. Walls covered in maps, timelines, and photos of 3 smiling boys frozen in summer innocence. Reporters arrived by evening. Satellite vans parked at the camp gates, broadcasting live updates to the entire state. Words like abduction, drowning, and ritual appeared in headlines within hours. The more the cameras rolled, the more theories multiplied. One local claimed to have seen a white van speeding down the dirt road around midnight. Another said strange lights hovered over the woods the week before. None of it could be confirmed. That night, the town's pastor opened the church doors for a vigil. Hundreds filled the pews, candles flickering like nervous heartbeats. Parents held hands with strangers. The pastor spoke of faith and patience, but the silence that followed his words was heavier than prayer could lift. Back at the camp, Sheriff Carver studied the evidence board. 3 sets of footprints leaving cabin 7, no signs of struggle. No prints returning. She questioned the night watchman Carl Denvers again and again, searching for any inconsistency. He swore he heard nothing, no voices, no screams, only the storm. His log entry still read, "All clear, quiet." When night fell again, the searchlights returned to the lake. The storm had churned the water into a mirrorless dark, hiding whatever it held. Divers moved methodically through the depths, guided only by rope and instinct, but every recovery line came up empty. By the 3rd day, exhaustion set in. The woods had been combed twice, the lake dragged end to end. Parents pleaded for more time, but resources were thinning. Then came a small break. A ranger reported finding a child's flashlight buried in silt near the western bank, its beam long dead, but the initials JM scratched faintly into the handle. It was Jacob's. The discovery reignited the search, but it also deepened the confusion. The flashlight lay nearly a mile from where the footprints ended. Media attention intensified. FBI agents joined the scene, their presence both reassuring and ominous. They brought ground-penetrating radar, forensic experts, psychological profilers, and still, not a single clear lead. The lake, the woods, the cabins, all combed clean of answers. Sheriff Carver refused to call it over. She spent nights, rewalking the trails, replaying the boys' possible routes in her mind. The counselors grew restless under questioning. Inconsistencies surfaced about curfew times, about who last saw the boys alive. One counselor mentioned something odd, that one of the floodlights facing the dock had been unplugged that night. No one knew why. On the 7th day, the official search was scaled back. Families gathered near the dock, staring at the still water that had swallowed their hope. Carver stood behind them, hat in hand, promising she would keep the case open. But the truth was already slipping from everyone's grasp. Evidence was drying, memories fading, and with every unanswered question, Ravenwood's silence grew louder. When reporters asked if she believed the boys were still alive, Sheriff Carver paused before answering. Her eyes lingered on the dark line of trees beyond the lake. "I don't know," she said softly, "but something out there knows what happened." And as dusk fell over Ravenwood once more, thunder rumbled in the distance, faint but steady, as if the storm was not finished yet. 2 years after that stormy July night, the sound of Ravenwood Lake had returned to its quiet rhythm. The camp stood abandoned, cabins locked, grass overgrown, the dock weathered gray by 2 unrelenting winters. What remained was a story that refused to fade, whispered in grocery lines, church pews, and the corners of every small-town diner in Maple Hollow. 3 boys gone without a trace, and no one could explain how. The investigation had stretched beyond its limits. The FBI's involvement had sparked brief hope, but even federal resources couldn't build evidence from air. Divers mapped every square meter of the lake, dogs retraced old scent paths, and detectives re-interviewed every counselor. Each time the answers grew thinner, the memories less certain. Sheriff Linda Carver still visited the site long after the search ended. She'd park her car near the gate and walk to the dock alone, her boots crunching over frostbitten pine needles. She'd stare at the water until dusk, whispering quiet promises no one else would hear. In her reports, she wrote the same line more than once. No sign of struggle. No clear direction of travel. Case unresolved. In the spring of 2004, the FBI's Missing Persons Division archived the case as inactive, no leads. The boys' families received formal letters typed in sterile language. Investigation exhausted all available evidence. None of the parents read beyond the first sentence. Eli Turner's mother stopped answering calls. Jacob Mill's father moved out of state, claiming he couldn't stand the sound of rain anymore. And Noah Price's older sister, barely 15 at the time, began collecting every article, clipping, and rumor she could find, building her own private archive of grief. Years later, she'd be the first to call the FBI again when something new surfaced. But in 2005, everything seemed finished. The public lost interest, the news crews left, and the donations for search efforts dwindled to nothing. Ravenwood Camp went up for sale that autumn but never found a buyer. Locals said no one wanted to rebuild where the laughter had stopped. Inside the county sheriff's office, the case file grew thick but lifeless. Dozens of interviews, photos of the dock, forensic analyses, all neatly labeled and filed away. The flashlight found on the western bank had yielded no fingerprints, only rain residue. The boys' carved initials on the dock had faded under algae and time. Then in late October 2005, a last attempt was made. A forensic geologist brought in to examine the soil around the missing footprint trail. His findings were inconclusive. He noted something peculiar, though. The soil displacement suggests upward pressure, not lateral, as if the ground itself shifted beneath them. His report was quietly filed and never referenced again. By December, the sheriff's department officially closed the investigation. The final entry in the case log read simply, "No further evidence anticipated. Case status, cold." That night, as the first snow fell, Carver locked the office and lingered beside the board where 3 school photos still hung, Eli, Noah, and Jacob, smiling in innocence. The edges of the photos had curled from age. She removed them one by one, placing them gently into the file folder marked Ravenwood Era 3. Before leaving, she turned off the desk lamp but hesitated at the doorway. In the faint glow from the hallway light, something on the corkboard caught her eye. A small note pinned years earlier, written in her own handwriting. "Keep looking near the dock lights." She tore it down, folded it, and slipped it into her coat pocket. Outside, the snow blanketed the old road leading to the lake. For the first time in 2 years, no search teams, no reporters, no footprints marked the path. Only stillness. Somewhere deep beneath the frozen lake, the silence seemed almost too perfect. 2 decades later, when a retired agent would reopen the file, that same silence would finally begin to speak. 2 decades had passed since the gates of Ravenwood Camp rusted shut, and most people in Maple Hollow had learned to live with the silence. The missing boys had become a story parents whispered to keep their children close, a warning, not a memory. The lake still shimmered each summer, calm and deceptive, as if nothing terrible had ever touched its surface. In a small apartment outside Portland, Daniel Holt woke every morning at 5 a.m. out of habit. The former FBI agent had retired early after a breakdown he never discussed. His desk drawer held a single file he never returned to the archives, Ravenwood 03. He told himself he kept it for closure, but deep down he knew it was because the case had never stopped whispering. One gray March morning, a plain cardboard parcel appeared on his doorstep. No return address, No markings except his name written in uneven black ink. Inside lay a weathered VHS tape wrapped in wax paper and a single photograph. The picture showed 3 boys standing on the Ravenwood dock. They were smiling, blurred slightly by motion. But in the corner of the frame, timestamped July 13, 2003, 11:47 p.m., a faint fourth shape stood behind them, half in shadow. Holt's stomach tightened. The official timeline had placed the disappearance before 11:30. He searched the parcel for a note. Nothing. Only a faint scent of mildew and lake water. He turned the tape over. On the label, handwritten in fading marker R03. For a long time, he just stared at it. Then training took over. He logged the package, photographed it from every angle, and called the Bureau's cold case unit. Within hours, 2 agents arrived at his door. They spoke in quiet tones, professional but cautious, the way people talk when old ghosts come back to life. At headquarters, technicians prepared specialized equipment to digitize the tape. The cassette was brittle, edges flaking. As the machine hummed to life, a faint hiss filled the lab, the sound of 20 years collapsing into a single moment. The footage began with static, then the grainy outline of water reflecting light. Holt leaned forward. The image steadied, the Ravenwood dock unmistakable even through distortion. 3 figures appeared, small and laughing, their voices barely audible beneath the tape's low hum. The timestamp matched the photograph, then a flicker. A movement at the edge of the frame. A tall shape stepping from the trees, unrecognizable, featureless. The boys turned toward it. One of them raised a flashlight. Its beam caught something metallic, glinting briefly before the screen erupted in white static. The tape stuttered, then ended. The room fell silent except for the mechanical whir of the spool rewinding. No one spoke. Holt felt a chill crawl up his spine. Not fear, but recognition. He'd seen that kind of footage before. Surveillance, not home video. The lab director froze a single frame and enhanced the lower corner. Faint letters appeared on the grainy overlay, digits stamped by an internal system clock. Not consumer format, but government-grade timestamping used in restricted observation projects. Someone had filmed the boys deliberately. The agents exchanged wary glances. Holt kept his eyes on the screen. The questions multiplied faster than answers. Who recorded this? Why send it now? And how had the footage survived 2 decades without trace in Bureau archives? He thought of Sheriff Carver's old report, the unplugged floodlight facing the dock, the missing security feed. It was no coincidence. The realization hit with quiet certainty. The camera that filmed this scene had been hidden at Ravenwood itself. Outside, rain tapped against the windows like a slow metronome. The room smelled faintly of dust and ozone. Holt felt the years of silence give way to something alive again. Movement, direction, the pulse of unfinished business. He asked the technicians to replay the tape one last time. As the flickering images filled the screen, a single frame at the very end caught his attention, a reflection in the lake, someone holding the camera. The footage went black. Holt exhaled slowly. Someone wanted us to find this, he murmured. The question is, why now? The answer would come soon, carried in smoke and fire. The tape had become more than evidence. It was a voice from beneath 2 decades of silence. The next morning, the cold case unit sealed the lab and transferred the digitized footage to a secured server for analysis. Every frame was studied, every sound filtered through forensic software. But the more they examined it, the less sense it made. Daniel Holt sat in the observation room, coffee untouched, eyes fixed on the slow flicker of paused images. The 3 boys were clear now, Eli, Noah, Jacob, frozen mid-laughter, faces illuminated by flashlight beams. Behind them, a figure stood partially out of focus, tall, lean, wearing what looked like a ranger's jacket. The timestamp verified 11:47 p.m., minutes after the official disappearance window. Holt played the enhanced audio again. Underneath the hiss of static came faint murmurs, laughter, then something else. 3 syllables, almost like a command, spoken in a deep mechanical tone. The sound wasn't human, or maybe it was, buried under distortion. The technicians cleaned the audio further, layer by layer. As the filters processed, one of them froze. There, he whispered, pointing to a frequency spike. Beneath the static, a new voice emerged, faint but unmistakable. A man saying, "Keep the light steady. That one phrase changed everything. It meant someone had been present, someone directing the boys, filming them intentionally. Holt requested access to all known personnel files connected to Ravenwood Camp in 2003. The staff list included 9 counselors, 1 head director and a caretaker, Elias Marin. His name was the only one that appeared again in a different file, an archived FBI case from 1998, involving unauthorized surveillance at a federal youth program in Washington. The charges had been dropped for lack of evidence. As Holt stared at the connection, memory stirred. He remembered the report from Sheriff Carver about the unplugged floodlight near the dock. Maybe Marin hadn't wanted light interfering with his camera's view. The next phase of the analysis focused on the final seconds of the tape. The screen brightened as the lake reflected a flash, followed by distortion. Horizontal lines, interference, then darkness. But just before the feed cut, the reflection of the person holding the camera became visible in the rippling water. The angle distorted the face, but Holt could make out a single defining feature, a circular insignia on the jacket sleeve. It wasn't a camp logo. It was government-issued. Holt printed the still frame, enlarged it, and pinned it beside the photo of the boys on the evidence board. The insignia matched a discontinued federal contract program, the same one that had once employed Marin as a field safety coordinator. Officially, the program had been dissolved in 2004. He leaned back, the realization pressing heavy against his chest. Ravenwood had been part of something larger, an experiment hidden behind summer camp smiles. The Bureau's new director of cold cases, Marcia Lang, reviewed the findings in silence. Her expression hardened as she flipped through the old records. "If this tape's real," she said quietly, "then someone's been sitting on classified footage for 20 years. She authorized a background trace on Marin. Within hours, they found his last recorded address, a remote cabin near Crater Ridge, 40 miles from the old camp. Off-grid, no phone, no taxes, no social footprint since 2005. Holt insisted on leading the visit himself. "If he's alive," he said, "he's the only living link between the tape and the boys." As evening fell, he sat alone in his car outside Bureau headquarters, the printed still from the tape resting on the passenger seat. The rain had returned, soft, persistent, tapping against the windshield like a countdown. He thought of Sheriff Carver, of the families who never stopped waiting. For 20 years, their lives had been suspended in unanswered questions. Now, finally, the silence was cracking. When he started the engine, thunder rolled in the distance, the same low, crawling sound that had haunted Ravenwood that night in 2003. The road ahead wound through forest and fog, toward the mountains where Marin lived unseen. And somewhere beyond the rain, a truth was waiting that would burn its way out of hiding. The road to Crater Ridge climbed through a forest that seemed untouched by time. Fog draped over the trees like breath made visible, and the rain that had begun in the city now thinned into mist. Daniel Holt followed the dirt path as it narrowed into a single track winding along the hillside. GPS lost signal miles back. He drove by instinct, headlights carving pale tunnels through the fog. At the end of the road stood a weather-beaten cabin, its windows dark, roof sagging under moss and years. A rusted sign on the fence read "No trespassing." It was the kind of place that had long stopped expecting visitors. Holt stepped out of the car and listened. The forest was silent except for the slow creak of the wind through pine. He approached the porch, boots sinking into damp soil. The air smelled faintly of kerosene and old metal. When he knocked, the door didn't move. A moment later, it opened slightly and an eye appeared through the crack. Elias Marin looked older than the file photos. Hair white, skin sallow, hands trembling slightly as he gripped the frame. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice coarse from disuse. Holt held up his badge. "Federal investigation. I need to ask you about Ravenwood Camp." For a moment, Marin didn't breathe. Then he stepped aside, motioning toward the dim interior. The cabin smelled of damp paper and oil. Folders, photographs, and spools of magnetic tape lay stacked across a desk beside a broken typewriter. Holt glanced around. "You've been keeping records." "Not records," Marin muttered. "Proof. No one listened before." He poured 2 cups of coffee from a stained pot and sat, the mug rattling in his hand. "They told me to destroy it all after the shutdown. But I knew this day would come." Holt placed a photo from the tape on the table, the boys on the dock, the shadow behind them. Marin stared at it for a long time. "You found the footage," he whispered. "Who filmed it?" Holt asked. Marin looked up slowly. "Not me, I maintained the systems. Cameras, sensors, lights. The footage was automatic, monitored from off-site. They called it Project Nightjar. Behavioral study, they said. Supervised experiments to test response under stress. Kids never knew they were being observed." Holt's chest tightened. "What kind of experiments?" Marin rubbed his forehead. "Isolation drills, sensory tests, harmless at first. But something changed that last summer. New faces came, men in suits, no names, government credentials. They took over the equipment room, restricted access, told us to keep quiet." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a faded envelope. Inside were Polaroids, grainy stills of security screens showing the boys near the dock. In one, a fourth figure stood among them, barely visible. "That night," Marin said, "they made me shut down the lights. Said they were running a final observation, but after midnight everything went wrong. Static on all channels. Then nothing." "Did you see them again?" Holt asked. Marin's voice fell to a whisper. "No. When the storm passed, the basement cameras showed only water. They sealed the lower facility the next morning. I tried to speak, but they threatened charges, told me I'd be buried along with the files. So I left." Holt leaned forward. "There was a lower facility? Beneath the camp?" Marin hesitated, eyes darting to the window as if afraid the trees might be listening. "There was always a door under the lake house. They called it the hatch. Access required clearance I didn't have. But I heard generators running there long after the camp closed." A gust of wind rattled the shutters. For a moment, neither man spoke. "Why send the tape now?" Holt finally asked. Marin's gaze went distant. "I didn't. Someone found the archive. Someone wants the truth out, but not cleanly. There are others still protecting what happened down there." He stood abruptly, voice trembling. "You have to leave. They'll come if they know you were here." Before Holt could reply, the sound of an engine echoed from the valley, a low, steady growl climbing the ridge. Marin froze. "It's too late." Holt moved to the window. Through the fog, faint headlights advanced up the dirt path. Marin backed away toward the desk, fumbling for a metal tin. He pressed it into Holt's hand. "Everything I kept, notes, coordinates. If I don't make it, follow the numbers." The headlights grew brighter. Holt turned to ask what was happening, but Marin was already moving toward the back door. The next moment came with a blast of heat and light. The windows shattered as flames erupted from the side of the cabin. Holt hit the floor, covering his face as fire swallowed the room. When he staggered outside, choking on smoke, the cabin was fully engulfed. There was no sign of Elias Marin. Only the tin in Holt's hand remained, its metal seared warm against his palm. Inside it, a slip of paper bore 2 words and a coordinate line. "Under Ravenwood." The smoke from Ravenwood Ridge still clung to Holt's clothes as he sat in his motel room hours later, the metal tin on the table before him. Its surface was scorched, warped at the corners, but the lock had melted loose in the fire. He pried it open carefully, the faint smell of ash and old paper filling the room. Inside lay a handful of brittle documents, photocopies of typed reports, a strip of undeveloped negatives, and a folded map marked with red ink. The heading on the first page was stamped in black. U.S. Department of Behavioral Sciences, Project Nightjar, 2002. Nearly every paragraph below was covered in thick black lines. Holt adjusted the lamp closer. Between the redactions, scattered fragments of text emerged. Subject Group B. Prolonged isolation. Lake facility observation period. Auditory triggers. Then near the bottom, incident classified. Containment protocols enacted August 12, 2003. His pen tapped against the desk. August 12th. That was the night the 3 boys vanished. Holt's breath tightened as he flipped to the next page, a memo addressed to Director H. Langston. The signature beneath was faint but visible. Holt knew the name. Langston had led the Bureau's Behavioral Research Division until his sudden resignation in 2005, the same year the case was closed. He dialed an internal line, one reserved for old colleagues still inside the system. "Ellis, it's Holt." A pause. "Jesus, Daniel. You're digging into ghosts again?" "I need access to Project Nightjar," Holt said. "Anything archived under behavioral sciences, early 2000s. There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. "That's black-level clearance. You're not supposed to have it." Then pretend you didn't hear this call. He hung up and opened the folded map. It showed the Ravenwood grounds before demolition. In the lower left corner, a hand-drawn arrow pointed toward the lake, where a note read simply, "Sub-level access, restricted." Coordinates scribbled beneath matched the numbers Marin had given him. The motel clock ticked past midnight. Outside, rain began again, tapping against the window in steady rhythm. Holt leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the smell of burning wood still sharp in his memory. Marin hadn't imagined any of it. The experiment was real, and it hadn't been fully buried. He took the negatives to a portable scanner in his bag and fed one through. As the image developed on the laptop screen, his stomach clenched. It showed an underground corridor, metal doors, fluorescent lights flickering in sequence. 3 figures stood in the distance. 2 were men in lab coats. The third was a child, barefoot, wearing the same camp uniform the boys had in the tape. The file timestamp read 03:12 a.m. August 12, 2003. Another negative followed, a close-up of a clipboard marked Subject 04, containment pending. No name, just a code, Ravenwood B04. Holt opened a classified archive interface he'd managed to keep access to after retirement and entered the code. The system froze for a moment before returning a message in red. Access restricted. Level black. Then the page vanished entirely. He stared at the blank screen. Someone somewhere was watching the same files. Someone still had control. A soft knock broke the silence. Holt's pulse quickened. He turned off the monitor, reached for his weapon, and approached the door cautiously. When he opened it, no one was there, just a small envelope on the floor, damp from rain. Inside was a single Polaroid. It showed Marin's cabin, hours earlier before the fire, taken from a distance. On the back, written in marker, were 5 words, "Stop digging." "Agent Holt, enough." He looked out into the parking lot. Empty. Only the hiss of rain and the neon sign flickering in the dark. Holt sat back on the bed, turning the photo in his hands. Whoever had burned the cabin knew exactly where he was. Marin's warning echoed in his mind. "They'll come if they know you were here." He opened his laptop again, saving the scanned negatives to a hidden drive, then folded the map and slipped it inside his jacket. Whatever was buried under that lake, the Bureau or someone inside it, had kept sealed for 2 decades. As thunder rolled over the mountains, Holt whispered to himself, "You can erase the files, but not the truth." He grabbed his keys, checked his gun, and stepped out into the rain. The coordinates waited in his pocket, leading him back to Ravenwood, and beneath the surface of that forgotten lake, something long hidden was ready to be found. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It came down in sheets that blurred the road and turned the mountain dirt to black glass. Daniel Holt drove through it, headlights slicing the storm, the coordinates still glowing faintly on his dashboard screen. But this time he wasn't heading toward the lake. He was heading to find the man who once signed the Project Nightjar files, Director Howard Langston. Langston had vanished from public records in 2006. Retirement, the Bureau had claimed. But Holt knew how silence worked in Washington. The louder the secret, the quieter the exit. He tracked him to a private care facility outside Portland. A quiet building wrapped in fog and pine, tucked away behind tall iron gates. The nurse at the front desk looked puzzled when Holt showed his credentials. "You're here to see Mr. Langston?" "He doesn't get visitors. Hasn't for years." "I'll make it quick," Holt said. Langston's room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old coffee. The man in the bed looked smaller than his photographs, bones visible beneath thin, pale skin. His eyes, though cloudy, still held a sharp flicker of recognition when Holt entered. "Agent Holt," he rasped. "I thought they'd send someone younger." Holt pulled a chair closer. "You remember me?" "I remember every man who touched this case." Langston's voice trembled. "You were one of the few who asked questions you weren't supposed to." Holt set the tin on the table. "Marin's dead. His cabin burned 2 nights ago. Before he died, he gave me this. You were his superior, weren't you?" Langston's gaze fell on the scorched edges of the documents inside. His hands twitched slightly. "He wasn't supposed to keep those." "Neither was I supposed to see them," Holt replied. "But here we are. Tell me what happened at Ravenwood." Langston's breathing slowed. The rain against the window grew softer, like a metronome marking time he didn't have left. "You think you want the truth," he murmured. You don't. It doesn't free anyone. It buries them. I've already been buried, Holt said. Now I dig. Langston closed his eyes for a moment as if weighing whether confession was punishment or mercy. When he spoke again, his voice carried the faint tremor of guilt aged by 2 decades. Ravenwood was never a camp, he began. It was a front. The department used it to test resilience training on minors, behavioral response to fear, isolation, deprivation. It started under defense funding, post-9/11 era paranoia. They called it cognitive endurance conditioning. We called it survival education. He coughed, wincing, then continued. But by 2003 it went wrong. One of the children, subject 4, reacted violently to the isolation sequence. He began hearing voices through the intercom systems, messages no one was sending. We assumed psychosis, but it spread to the others, nightmares, paranoia. Then, one night they vanished from every live feed. Just static, Holt's voice dropped. You mean they died? Langston shook his head weakly. We never found bodies. But the thermal scanner showed movement beneath the lake. Something was alive down there. His eyes flickered open again, clouded and fearful. We sealed the lower level, buried the files. Marin was supposed to destroy the tapes. Why keep it secret? Holt asked. You had an obligation. Langston's voice broke into a whisper. Because the voices didn't stop. After the camp was closed, we started getting transmissions. Unmarked frequencies repeating the boys' names. The project wasn't just behavioral, Agent Holt. We opened something we didn't understand. The air in the room felt colder now. The monitor beside Langston's bed began to beep irregularly. He looked toward the window, eyes wet. You can't bring them back. Whatever's under Ravenwood, it remembers. Who else knows? Holt pressed. Langston's lips moved soundlessly for a moment, then he whispered. Check the archived recordings. Channel 17B. The confession's already there. Before Holt could respond, the monitor flatlined into a steady tone. Langston's eyes stayed open, fixed on the storm outside. Holt stood slowly, pulse pounding, then reached to switch off the machine. On the table beside the bed lay a folded paper from Langston's pocket, an old hospital memo. At the bottom, a handwritten note read, Frequency 17B, Ravenwood signal. As he walked down the corridor, the rain eased into silence. Somewhere in the building, a faint radio hiss crackled through the speakers, just static at first. Then a voice, thin and distant, whispering through the noise. We're still here. Holt froze. The sound faded, and with it came the realization that the case was no longer just about the missing boys. It was about what they'd left behind. The drive back to Ravenwood took 6 hours through silence. Daniel Holt didn't play the radio. He couldn't. Every burst of static reminded him of Langston's final words, Frequency 17B. Ravenwood signal. By dawn, fog rolled low over the valley, swallowing the remnants of what used to be the camp. The main structures had long since collapsed into overgrowth. The lake, calm and dark, mirrored the gray sky above. It looked ordinary, peaceful even, but beneath that surface lay 20 years of buried evidence. Holt parked near the old dock, the same one from the recovered tape. The boards creaked under his boots, warped by time. In the distance, crows drifted low across the water, their reflections vanishing in ripples. He carried the equipment from his trunk, a waterproof recorder, sonar scanner, and a military-grade receiver tuned to 17B. As soon as he switched it on, a low hum filled the air, a mechanical vibration, steady and unnatural. Then came the whisper. Not a voice exactly, more like breath pushed through static. Daniel, he froze. The voice had used his name. Static followed, then a pattern. 3 short bursts, a pause, then 2 long. Morse code. He scribbled the sequence on his notebook and translated, Under hatch, the hatch Marin mentioned. The one hidden beneath the lake house. Holt followed the shoreline until he reached what remained of the structure. A collapsed boathouse half submerged in water. He waded in, the cold biting through his clothes. Beneath the debris, he found what looked like a metal surface coated with algae and mud. He brushed it clear and uncovered a corroded handle. He gripped it and pulled. The hatch resisted, groaned, then gave way with a metallic sigh. A rush of stagnant air escaped, foul with rot and chemicals. Below, a ladder descended into darkness. He turned on his flashlight and began to climb. The light beam cut through the dust and mist below, revealing concrete walls slick with moisture. The air was colder, dense. When his boots touched the ground, he realized he was standing in a narrow corridor. Along the walls were faded hazard signs, biosensory division, and power lines that still hummed faintly, impossibly alive after all these years. The passage led to a control room. Monitors lined one wall, their glass screens fractured but intact. A generator somewhere deep within the facility still pulsed with residual current. Holt brushed the dust from one monitor and pressed the switch. To his shock, the screen flickered on. Lines of static resolved into a grainy feed, a live camera still functioning. It showed the interior of another chamber, flooded ankle-deep in water. Something moved in the corner just at the edge of the frame. Holt's throat tightened. What the hell? He scanned the console and found a directory labeled Archive 17B. His hand trembled as he clicked. Rows of recordings appeared, each time stamped between August 10 to 12, 2003. The final file was marked, Observation End, 03:17 a.m. He opened it. The video began with the boys, Evan, Riley, and Nate, inside a dim room sitting on metal cots. They were whispering to each other, scared but calm. Then the lights flickered. A door opened off-screen. A faint hum grew louder, like feedback from a speaker. One of the boys looked directly at the camera and whispered, "It's calling again." The footage distorted. For a few seconds, nothing but static. Then something else, shapes moving in the reflection of the water on the floor, too fluid to be human. The recording ended abruptly with a scream, high-pitched, cut off mid-breath. Holt exhaled, heart pounding. He stepped back from the monitor and almost tripped over a rusted chair. His receiver still buzzed faintly on the desk. The signal on 17B was stronger now, almost deafening. He turned the dial to reduce the volume and heard it clearly this time. "They're still here." He spun toward the corridor. The sound wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from deeper within the facility. He followed the echo down a flight of steps that led to a submerged section. His flashlight caught glimpses of floating papers, dislodged wires, and a wall of mirrors cracked by moisture. At the far end, another steel door stood half open. The word containment was stenciled above it. Inside, he found 3 empty beds, their restraints undone. A fourth cot, smaller, was still occupied not by a person but by a set of children's clothes, folded neatly, untouched by time. He noticed a waterlogged cassette recorder beside it. The label had faded, but one word was still visible. Confession. Holt reached out to pick it up, when his radio erupted with noise again. This time not whispers, but a voice, urgent and clear. "Agent Holt, leave. Now." The transmission cut. He turned toward the ladder leading up to the hatch, but through the reflection on the water, a shadow moved behind him, then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything. The air below Ravenwood was heavy, thick with the smell of metal and decay. For a few heartbeats, Daniel Holt couldn't move. The flashlight had died, his radio hissed faintly, and somewhere behind him, water dripped rhythmically, slow, deliberate, like a countdown. He reached for the backup light strapped to his vest and flicked it on. The beam trembled across the flooded chamber, revealing the cassette recorder he had dropped moments before. It floated gently, its red label glinting under the light. Confession. Holt picked it up and shook the water from the casing. To his surprise, it wasn't ruined. The tape inside was sealed. He slipped it into his field player, pressed play, and waited. At first, only static. Then came a man's voice, strained, whispering through distortion. "This is Elias Marin," it said. "If you're hearing this, the system's failed. The containment didn't hold. We tried to shut it down, but it..." A long pause filled with breathing and faint knocking sounds. Then Marin's voice again, quieter. The boys weren't supposed to hear it. The frequency wasn't for them. It was a response signal. From beneath, Holt leaned closer. In the background of the tape, a low mechanical hum grew louder, almost like chanting slowed to static. Marin's voice cracked. "We didn't build the lower level. It was already here. The project was never about behavior. It was about translation." The tape distorted violently and the rest dissolved into noise. Holt stopped the player and stood still. The walls around him seemed to pulse faintly, like sound reverberating through the concrete. Then his receiver on the table came alive again, glowing pale green. The screen displayed a folder name he hadn't seen before. Archive R Footage Final. He hesitated, then hit enter. A new video appeared on the monitor. It was dated August 12, 2003, 03:19 a.m. The angle was fixed high, showing the containment chamber, the same room he was standing in now. The waterline was lower then. The boys were visible again, huddled near the center, terrified. The audio crackled, and a voice, cold, mechanical, spoke over the intercom. "Do you hear it now?" One of the boys, Evan, looked up. "Please stop." The other two pressed their hands over their ears. The camera shook as a deep vibration rippled through the floor. Then through the back wall of the chamber, a faint light began to glow, blue and pulsing like a heartbeat under the surface of the water. Riley shouted something unintelligible. The feed blurred as the camera tried to refocus. The light spread until the walls themselves seemed to breathe. Then came the sound, a chorus of voices overlapping in waves, each whispering the same words. "We're still here," the boys screamed. The video cut to static. Holt's stomach twisted. He scrubbed forward through the corrupted frames until a final image froze. The same room, now empty. Only rippling water remained. The timestamp read 03:27 a.m. He exhaled slowly, then glanced at the recorder again. The tape still played faint background noise, waves, faint breathing, then something new. The same whisper, but this time it said his name. Daniel. His blood ran cold. The voice was not Marin's. He looked at the monitor. The live feed was still on, showing the same empty chamber from another angle. Except something had changed. In the far corner, the water was moving, rippling outward as if disturbed. Holt leaned closer. Through the distortion, a faint silhouette formed, small, human-like. Then a hand broke the surface. Holt stumbled backward. The monitor flickered violently, cutting between frames of the past and the present, 2003 overlapping 2023. In each flicker, the boys appeared again motionless, standing in the same positions as before. Then they turned toward the camera. The feed went black. The generator above him began to whine, overloading. Sparks leapt from the wires. Holt grabbed the recorder and sprinted toward the ladder, the metal echoing under his boots. Behind him, the chamber walls groaned as the structure began to give. Water surged through the corridor, icy and fast. He climbed, lungs burning, until his hands found the hatch. He pushed it open and hauled himself onto the dock, just as the facility below erupted with a muffled roar. The lake rippled violently, sending waves crashing against the shore. For a long moment, Holt lay on the wet wood, chest heaving, rain mixing with sweat and lake water. The radio on his belt sparked once, then went silent. When he finally looked back toward the lake, the ripples had stopped. Only calm water remained, smooth, unbroken, as if nothing had ever stirred beneath it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the cassette. Its label was smeared but still legible. Confession. Somewhere behind him, thunder rolled across the valley. Holt turned toward the sound, eyes distant, voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't disappear," he said. "They were taken." And as he spoke, his radio flickered one last time, no signal, no words, just the faint echo of children laughing, carried through static and rain. By the time dawn touched the lake, Ravenwood looked the same as it always had. Quiet, pale, untouched by the decades that had passed. Yet something in the air felt different, as though the town itself had taken a breath after holding it for 20 years. The police sealed off the lake that morning, but it didn't matter. Within hours, the story of what Daniel Holt had uncovered was buried beneath layers of official language, classified documents, technical jargon, missing timestamps. Reporters who tried to chase it were told there had been a chemical leak beneath the facility. Nothing more. No one spoke of the boys. No one mentioned the tape. But for those who lived here, silence became the only language they knew. The locals whispered that the water at Ravenwood never froze again after that night. Some said they saw faint lights beneath the surface at dusk, pulsing like stars trapped underwater. Others claimed they could still hear children laughing near the shoreline when the wind carried across the valley. Most didn't believe any of it. Or maybe they did, just enough to never go near the water again. Daniel Holt filed his final report in late October 2023. It was short, barely 2 pages. No suspects, no remains, no physical evidence linking anyone to the disappearance. The words "insufficient for prosecution" closed the case once more. Stamped and filed under Ravenwood, inactive. Afterward, Holt resigned. He moved to the coast, a quiet house overlooking gray water and gulls. But even there, he couldn't escape the feeling that something still watched him from the depths. He kept the cassette locked in a safe behind his desk. Though some nights, when the wind pressed against the windows, he swore he could hear faint static coming from inside. He had tried to replay it once more, only once. The tape had degraded, warped by moisture and time, but one thing was clear: the last few seconds had changed. There was no longer Marin's voice. No chanting, no hum. Only a small trembling whisper. 3 words spoken by a child. "We're still here." Holt didn't tell anyone. He simply turned off the player, locked it away again, and poured himself another drink. Back in Ravenwood, the world kept turning. The local school was rebuilt. The campsite reopened under a new name. A shiny plaque stood at the edge of the forest now, engraved with a sanitized memory. In remembrance of those lost, and the hope that endures. People visited, took pictures, left flowers. But no one really remembered. Not properly, because what Holt didn't know, what no one had ever noticed, was that something else had shifted in the records that year. A quiet data correction, somewhere deep in the digital archives of the Bureau. The official list of missing persons from 2003 had been amended. The Ravenwood case number remained, but the entry for the 3 boys was gone. In its place were 3 new names, different surnames, different towns, different years, erased, rewritten, moved it almost as if the system itself was trying to forget. And yet, late that winter, a ranger working night patrol at the lake called in a strange report. He'd seen footprints by the shoreline, small, barefoot, leading down into the icy water. There had been no storms, no trespassers, no reason for anyone to be there. The prints stopped right at the edge, disappearing beneath the waves. When he looked closer, the ranger said he found something glinting between the rocks, a rusted metal badge, tarnished and half-broken. The letters were barely visible, but one word could still be read: archive. He filed a report. No one followed up. A month later, the ranger stopped showing up for work. His cabin was found empty, his radio left on, the static still whispering faintly through the speaker. By spring, the lake was calm again. The tourists returned. The stories faded, and the town, faithful as ever, began to forget once more. But a few people never did. Among them was a young investigative journalist named Claire Marin, the granddaughter of Elias Marin. She had grown up hearing rumors about her grandfather's experiment and the mysterious footage that had vanished after the Bureau's sweep. In 2024, she filed a formal request under the Freedom of Information Act for access to the Ravenwood case files. The request was denied. 2 months later, she received a plain envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, a still frame from the 2003 surveillance footage. 3 boys, standing ankle-deep in water, all facing the camera. On the back, someone had written in black ink, "Find the rest." Claire stared at it for a long time, the rain tapping softly against her window. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled over Ravenwood Valley once again, and in that moment, the silence that had buried the town for 20 years began to stir. The envelope sat on Claire Marin's desk for 3 days before she dared open it again. Each time she glanced at the photo inside, her pulse quickened. The 3 boys ankle-deep in water staring straight into the lens. The image had a strange blur, as if the surface of the lake was trembling even though everything else stood still. She'd checked the metadata. No source, no timestamp, no trace of digital editing. It was a scan from an analog reel, most likely from the original surveillance tape recovered in 2023. The handwriting on the back haunted her the most. Find the rest. Claire had spent years chasing truth in other people's tragedies, but this was different. This was her bloodline, the shadow her grandfather, Dr. Elias Marin, had left behind. The Bureau called him the Keeper of Ravenwood, but her family never spoke his name. Her mother used to flinch when someone mentioned the lake, as if a door had been left open there that should have stayed closed. Now that door was calling her too. She began with what was left of the public record. Most of it was sealed, but a handful of archived articles remained. Grainy clippings from the Maple Hollow Gazette, dated July 2003. Headlines read, "3 campers vanish into thin air. FBI joins search at Ravenwood," and later, "Case officially closed. The deeper she looked, the stranger the trail became. Multiple reports contradicted each other. Different times, altered names, conflicting witness statements. And then she found something buried in a local library archive. A missing persons bulletin with 4 faces. Not 3. The 4th boy's name had been scratched out. Claire printed everything, covering her apartment wall with maps, timelines, and red thread connections. In the center, she pinned the photo, the one from the envelope. And then she noticed something she hadn't before. In the reflection on the water behind the 3 boys, a faint silhouette stood on the dock. Tall, motionless, watching. The proportions were off, too long, too thin. The head tilted slightly toward the camera. She enhanced the scan. The image pixelated, distorted, but the outline remained. Someone had been there. Her instinct screamed this wasn't a coincidence. The photo wasn't just a clue, it was an invitation. That night, Claire drove to Ravenwood. The road twisted through pine forest, washed in fog. The camp was sealed off, still listed as federal property, but the fence had long since rusted away. The cabins stood hollow beneath the trees, their roofs caved in like folded paper. At the lake's edge, moonlight scattered across the water. The air was cold, still and heavy with memory. She stepped onto the dock. The wood groaned under her weight. And then, something flickered near the tree line. A soft glow pulsing faintly. She followed it, her recorder running. Near the old storage shed, she found a small metal box half buried in dirt. It had a faded bureau seal and a tag, property of case file R20307. Inside was a stack of cassette reels, 20 or more. The labels were smudged, but one stood out clearly. Session 9, July 16, 2003. Her hands shook as she placed it in her portable player. The tape hissed. Then a voice, her grandfather's, calm, clinical, echoing through time. Subject response consistent with prior exposure. Visual anomalies persist around the shoreline. The children claim to hear a voice beneath the water. They call it the echo, static. Then another voice, young, trembling, pleading, "Dr. Marin, it's calling again." It says it remembers. The recording cut off abruptly. Claire froze. Her grandfather hadn't just been studying the lake. He'd been experimenting with it. Lightning split the sky. The echo of thunder rippled across the valley, and for a moment, the surface of the lake shimmered, glowing faintly in the distance, as though something beneath was stirring. Claire stumbled backward, the recorder still in her hand. The tape hissed once more before dying. On the ground behind her, she noticed footprints in the wet soil, bare, small, leading toward the water, exactly like the ranger had described a year earlier. She turned toward the lake, her breath visible in the cold air. The surface was smooth again, still, too still. From somewhere beneath, a sound began to rise, faint, rhythmic, like children humming a song. Claire backed away slowly, eyes locked on the ripples spreading outward from the center of the lake. Then, just before the sound faded completely, a whisper came through the wind. "We never left." The words barely touched the air before vanishing into the fog. Claire stood frozen, heart pounding, knowing the story wasn't over, only buried again. And as she left Ravenwood that night, the tape still clutched in her hand, she made a promise to herself. She would uncover what the Bureau had buried, no matter the cost, because the echo of 2003 was no longer silent, it was awake.